Rain fell steadily over the Sydney CBD, turning the footpaths into dark mirrors of hurried footsteps and indifference. Umbrellas moved like a slow, colorless tide as people rushed past, eyes fixed ahead, minds locked on schedules, phones, and problems waiting elsewhere. In the middle of the wet pavement, almost out of place, the dog sat, perfectly still. Rex, a large shepherd mix, his fur was soaked and clung to his thin frame, water dripping from his ears onto the ground below. He didn't bark, he didn't whine, he didn't chase after anyone. He simply sat there, quiet and unmoving, as if he had already learned that asking for help no longer changed anything. Shoes passed within inches of him, leather boots, polished dress shoes, worn sneakers, all stepping around his small body without stopping. Some people glanced down for half a second, others didn't look at all. To most, he was just another uncomfortable sight in a city full of them. Rex watched each passer-by with dark, tired eyes. There was no fear in his gaze, no aggression, just a deep, unsettling calm, the kind that comes after hope has been tested too many times and left behind. A woman slowed her pace for a moment, her brow tightening with concern, before she sighed and kept walking. A man shook his head quietly and disappeared into the crowd. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed, but the hand was pulled away. The moment dismissed. No one stopped. No one knelt down. No one reached out. The city was too busy to notice a wet dog sitting alone in the rain, and Rex was too silent to demand attention. His body trembled slightly, not just from the cold, but from something heavier, something buried deep inside. What no one realized was that Rex wasn't lost. He hadn't wandered into that street by accident. He wasn't confused or aimless. He was waiting. The way he sat straight back despite exhaustion, eyes scanning faces with purpose, revealed it. This wasn't the posture of a stray with nowhere to go. This was the posture of an animal holding onto a memory, holding onto a promise. That exact spot meant something to him, even if the world around him had long forgotten why. A city bus rushed past, splashing dirty water across the pavement. Rex didn't flinch. A police vehicle noticed him from across the street, paused briefly, then continued on its route. Life moved forward without hesitation, flowing around the small, silent figure at its center. Beneath the grime and rain soaked fur, there was something unusual, a discipline, a stillness that didn't belong to a dog abandoned at random. There was history there, there was loyalty, and then slowly something began to change. Not a sound, not a movement, just a small detail hidden beneath the wet fur and the weight of the rain. A detail so easy to miss that hundreds had already walked past it, but once it was finally seen, people would stop mid-step, breath catching in their throats. The noise of the city would fade and the crowd would freeze in silence. At first, it was just one commuter who noticed something was wrong, or rather, something was different. He slowed his pace, frowning slightly as he looked back at the dog sitting in the rain. From a distance, it still looked like an ordinary stray, wet fur, thin body, silent posture, but there was a shape beneath the soaked hair that didn't belong on a forgotten animal. The man took a cautious step closer, squinting through the drizzle, trying to make sense of what his eyes were telling him. As he came nearer, the detail became clearer. Wrapped tightly around the dog's neck, partially hidden under mud and rain-darkened fur, was a collar. Not a cheap one, not frayed or broken. It was thick, reinforced, and unmistakably official. Metal clasps, heavy stitching, and stitched into the leather, barely visible unless you were close enough to care, were faded letters and numbers. The man's breath slowed. This wasn't the kind of collar you found on a stray. This was the kind you found on a working dog. The man stopped completely. People behind him bumped into his shoulder, annoyed, confused by the sudden pause. He didn't move. He crouched slightly, enough to see better, enough to confirm what his instincts were screaming. The collar bore markings used by service units. The New South Wales Police Dog Unit. Search and rescue, military support. The rain washed over the letters. But they were still there, real, undeniable. This dog hadn't been abandoned by accident. He had belonged somewhere important. A woman noticed the man kneeling and followed his gaze. She gasped softly, hand rising to her mouth. Another person stopped, then another. A small circle began to form. Umbrellas. Lowering as curiosity replaced impatience. Rex remained perfectly still, eyes forward, posture unchanged. He didn't react to the attention. He didn't wag his tail or shift nervously. He sat like he had been trained to sit. Calm, disciplined, waiting for a command. That never came. Whispers moved through the growing crowd. Is that a police dog? Someone asked. Why is he here? Alone? Another murmured. Phones came out. Cameras pointing not for entertainment, but confusion. A police car pulled up. And Senior Constable Ellie McPherson noticed the gathering. She returned, pushing gently through the people. Her eyes went straight to the collar. Her expression changed instantly. The casual walk vanished, replaced by something heavier. Recognition. Ellie knelt carefully in front of the dog. Rain soaking into her uniform. She didn't touch him at first. She simply looked at the collar, at the posture, at the eyes. Then, quietly, almost under her breath, she said a single word meant only for trained animals. Rex's ears twitched. Just once. It was enough. Enough to confirm what everyone was beginning to understand. This dog was not waiting for food. He was not lost. He was holding a position, and whatever had placed him there had never told him he was allowed to leave. Ellie stayed kneeling in front of the dog, rain dripping from the brim of her cap as the city noise softened around them. She studied the animal closely now, the squared shoulders, the controlled breathing, the way the dog's eyes never wandered. This wasn't fear, this wasn't confusion, this was obedience held too long. Ellie slowly reached out, stopping inches from the dog's chest, careful not to break whatever invisible rule was keeping him frozen in place. The crowd stood silent. Umbrellas lowered without anyone noticing. Traffic sounds faded into the background as something heavier filled the air. Ellie gently read the numbers on the collar out loud. Her voice steady but low. A unit designation, a service code. She recognized the old, specific font of a past operational unit. Her jaw tightened. She had seen collars like this before, worn by the dogs of handlers she knew. This dog had worked, served, and he had been trained never to abandon his post. Ellie spoke again softly this time, a release command, simple, clear. A word that told a trained dog it was safe to move, safe to stand down. For a moment, nothing happened. Rex didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't break posture. His body trembled harder now, muscles straining as if caught between instinct and exhaustion. The silence grew uncomfortable. People held their breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then the dog's tail moved. Just once, a small uncertain motion against the wet pavement. His ears flicked backward, listening. His eyes finally shifted, locking onto Ellie's face. There was no joy in them, only relief mixed with disbelief. Like he wasn't sure he was allowed to accept what he'd heard. Slowly, painfully slowly, the dog lowered his head. It was the first movement he had made all day. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ellie swallowed hard, her voice catching as she repeated the command, firmer this time. The dog's front legs buckled slightly as he tried to stand, joints stiff from hours, maybe days of waiting. Ellie instinctively moved forward, supporting him before he could fall. The contact broke something inside the dog. His body leaned in, weight collapsing into the officer's arms. That was when people noticed the scars, faded lines beneath the fur, healed wounds along the chest and side, barely visible unless you knew where to look. This dog hadn't just served, he had survived. Ellie rested a hand on the dog's shoulder, eyes shining now, no longer trying to hide the truth. You stayed, she whispered. You stayed like you were trained to. And in that moment, everyone understood. This dog hadn't been abandoned, he had been left behind by circumstances he didn't understand, holding on to a final command given long ago, a command that told him to wait, and no one had ever come back to tell him he was free. As the dog leaned against Ellie, exhausted, but finally moving, the reason for his waiting began to surface piece by piece. Ellie glanced around, studying the exact spot where the dog had been sitting so long. It wasn't random, it was too precise. She recognized the location now, a crosswalk near the old registrar's office building in the rocks, a place once used as a temporary command point during an emergency months earlier. Her expression darkened as memory clicked into place. She spoke quietly to another officer who had arrived, pointing toward the building across the street. There was an incident here, she said. Search operation. One handler went down. The words landed heavily. A murmur moved through the crowd as people connected the dots. This wasn't just a trained dog. This was a partner who had lost his human and never understood why he never came back. Rex, still leaning against Ellie, lifted his head at the sound of voices. His eyes drifted toward the building, then back to the pavement where he had waited. Rain washed over his face, but he didn't blink. That spot, the exact place where he had been ordered to stay, was burned into him. Sit, wait, hold. Those commands were stronger than hunger, stronger than cold, stronger than time. A woman from the crowd stepped forward. Hesitantly, she had been there that day. She said, she remembered the sirens, the shouting, the chaos. She remembered seeing a dog sitting in that very place. While medics rushed past, her hand trembled as she spoke. He never moved, she whispered, even when they took his handler away. The crowd fell silent again, the weight of her words settling over everyone. Ellie nodded slowly. It explained everything. The discipline, the posture, the refusal to leave. After the incident, the city had moved on. Streets reopened. Tape came down. People returned to work. But no one had thought about Rex. No one had returned to release him from a command meant to last minutes, not months. Somewhere along the way, he had been forgotten except by himself. Ellie carefully removed the dog's collar, revealing an engraved name. Beneath the grime, the letters were worn, but still readable. Ellie exhaled sharply. You did your job, she said, voice thick. You stayed longer than anyone should have asked. She wrapped the collar around her wrist like something sacred, something earned. As the rain continued to fall, the dog finally sat again, not rigid this time, not guarding a position, just sitting, breathing, free in a way he hadn't been since that final command. And for the first time since anyone could remember, he wasn't waiting anymore. With the command finally lifted, the dog's body revealed the cost of his loyalty. Up close, it was impossible to ignore how much weight he had lost. His ribs pressed faintly against his soaked fur, and his legs trembled with the effort of simply standing. Ellie guided him gently to the curb, letting him rest without forcing movement. This wasn't weakness, it was the aftermath of devotion stretched far beyond what any living creature should endure. A medic from the crowd stepped forward, offering a thermal blanket and a bottle of water. Ellie accepted both, carefully wrapping the blanket around the dog's shoulders. Rex didn't resist. He didn't flinch. He simply accepted the warmth, eyes half closed, as if his body was only now realizing it was allowed to recover. When the water was offered, he hesitated, glancing at Ellie first, seeking permission before taking slow, careful sips. People watched in silence, many wiping their eyes without realizing it. Phones were lowered now. No one was recording. This wasn't a spectacle anymore. It was a reckoning. Someone whispered. He waited. All this time, another voice answered. Quietly, he never left. The realization hit harder than any dramatic moment could. This dog had lived every day, anchored to a single command, surviving on scraps and endurance, refusing to abandon his post. As the blanket settled, more details emerged. Callous Pads on his paws from standing on concrete, a raw patch near his shoulder, where a harness once rubbed, now healed. But permanent, these weren't signs of neglect, they were signs of service. Without relief, Ellie clenched her jaw, anger and guilt mixing behind her eyes, not at the dog, but at a system that moved on too quickly. A senior officer arrived and listened as the story was quietly retold. She looked down at the dog and removed her cap. He should have been brought in, she said. Simply, someone should have closed the loop. The words hung heavy. Responsibility had a way of spreading in moments like this. No single person was to blame, and that made it worse. Rex shifted closer to Ellie, resting his head against her knee. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was trust offered cautiously, like a gift earned through pain. Ellie placed a hand on his head and stayed there, unmoving, honoring it. Around them, the city continued, but quieter. Now, as if aware it had overlooked something important, what the dog had lost during that long wait could never be fully returned. Strength, comfort, time, but what he still carried, loyalty, discipline, faith, remained intact, and for the first time, it was finally being seen. As emergency services arrived, the question no one wanted to ask finally surfaced. What would happen to the dog now? He was no longer holding a position, no longer bound by an old command, but he was still without a home. Ellie felt the weight of that reality settle in her chest as she watched the dog breathe under the blanket, calmer than before, yet still alert. Years of training didn't disappear the moment freedom arrived. An animal control unit pulled up, doors opening with practiced efficiency. The sound made Rex tense, muscles tightening instinctively. Ellie noticed immediately, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. Easy, she murmured. You're safe. The words weren't a command, they were reassurance. Rex's ears relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained fixed on the vehicle, memories flickering. Behind them, a representative explained protocol in a low voice. The dog would be taken in, evaluated, placed on a list, maybe reunited with records, maybe transferred, maybe adopted. All reasonable steps, all necessary, but none of them felt right. Ellie looked down at the animal beside her, at the collar wrapped around her wrist, and felt something settle into place. A decision forming before she spoke it out loud. I'll take responsibility, Ellie said. The words surprised even her. The representative blinked, asking her to repeat herself. I'll take him, Ellie said again, firmer now. Temporary custody evaluation under my supervision. There was a pause. Paperwork would be required, approvals, conversations, but no one argued, no one could. The crowd released a breath they didn't know they were holding. Rex lifted his head, sensing the shift, though he didn't understand the words. What he understood was tone. Ellie's voice was steady, committed, the same kind of voice his handler must have had once. Slowly, Rex leaned forward, pressing his forehead against Ellie's leg, a quiet answer to a promise just made. Arrangements moved quickly after that. A vet check was scheduled, records would be pulled, the collar would be logged, but the most important thing had already happened. For the first time since that day months ago, the dog wasn't being passed along. He was being claimed, chosen, not as a problem, not as a responsibility, but as a life worth standing up for. As they prepared to leave, Ellie glanced back at the spot on the pavement where the dog had waited for so long. Rain continued to fall, washing away the faint outline his body had left behind. That place would fade like all things did, but the choice made there would not. It would follow both of them into whatever came next. And as they walked toward the vehicle together, Rex didn't look back. The first night away from the street was harder than anyone expected. Rex lay on a clean blanket in a quiet room, but sleep refused to come easily. Every sound made his ears twitch. The hum of electricity, the distant traffic, the creak of a door down the hall. His body was safe, warm, and dry, Yet his mind remained on duty. Years of training and months of waiting had taught him that rest was something earned only after permission was given. Ellie sat nearby, giving him space, but not distance. She watched the dog carefully, noticing how his eyes followed every movement, every shadow. This wasn't anxiety, it was vigilance. The kind that kept others safe at the cost of oneself. Ellie spoke softly, not issuing commands, just words, ordinary words. "You're okay," she said. "Nothing's happening." Rex listened, head resting on his paws. But his breathing stayed shallow. When exhaustion finally overtook him, it came in short bursts. The dog slept, woke, lifted his head, checked the room, and lay back down again. Each time Ellie was still there that mattered. Slowly, the time between those wake-ups grew longer. The tension in his shoulders loosened. The invisible weight of responsibility began, inch by inch, to lift. The next morning, the vet confirmed what everyone already suspected: malnutrition, dehydration, muscle strain. Nothing that couldn't be treated, but nothing that would heal overnight. Rex accepted the examination calmly, responding to quiet cues, holding still, even when discomfort flickered across his face. Service dogs didn't complain, they endured, and this one had endured far too much. Outside, news of what had happened spread quickly. People shared the story, not with outrage, but with reverence. A dog who stayed, partner who never abandoned his post. Messages came in, offers to help, to donate, to adopt. Ellie read them silently, then set the phone aside. The dog wasn't ready for noise. He was learning something far more difficult than obedience. He was learning how to rest without guilt. That afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the window, Rex finally slept deeply. No sudden movements, no scanning eyes, just slow, steady breathing. Ellie didn't move, didn't speak. She simply sat and watched, understanding the significance of the moment. This wasn't recovery yet. This was permission, granted at last. For the first time since the command had been given, the dog was truly off duty. As Rex's strength slowly returned, the past began to catch up with him. Records were finally located, old files buried under updates and transfers. A name appeared on the screen, followed by a date, then an incident report that no one had reopened in months. Ellie read it in silence, jaw tightening with every line. The handler hadn't just been injured that day, he had died shortly after being transported from the scene. Music. The report explained everything. Rex had been ordered to hold position while medics worked. Standard procedure, clear command, but the handler never came back to release him. Afterward, confusion, paperwork delays, and reassigned units caused the dog to slip through the cracks. No formal retrieval was logged. No closure command was issued. The system moved on. The dog did not. When Ellie shared the truth with the others, the room fell quiet. There was no anger, no shouting, just a heavy understanding of how something so loyal could be lost so easily. Rex, unaware of the words, lay nearby, eyes half open, listening to tone rather than language. He sensed something final had been said, something important had been named. A memorial service was already planned for the fallen handler. Months late but finally moving forward. The question came softly, should the dog attend? Some hesitated. Could be overwhelming, emotional, but Ellie didn't hesitate. He deserves to be there, she said, is part of that story. No one disagreed. On the day of the service, Rex walked calmly at Ellie's side. No harness, no commands, just presence. As they approached the memorial site, the dog slowed, nose lifting slightly as if something familiar was in the air. He didn't pull. He didn't resist. He simply understood that this place mattered. When they reached the marker, the dog sat down on his own, not rigid, not waiting for instruction, just sitting, heads bowed, flags folded, silence stretched across the space. The dog lowered his head, resting his chin against the ground, and stayed there. This time, he wasn't waiting for someone to come back. He was saying goodbye after the service ended, and the crowd slowly dispersed. The dog remained seated for a moment longer. No one rushed him, no one called his name. Ellie stood quietly nearby, allowing the dog the space to finish something deeply personal. When he finally stood, it wasn't stiff or uncertain, it was deliberate, the kind of movement made after a decision has been reached. In the weeks that followed, his recovery accelerated in ways no chart could explain. His appetite returned, strength filled his frame, the dullness in his eyes gave way to focus, not the sharp edge of duty, but a calmer awareness. He followed Ellie not because he was commanded to, but because he chose to. That distinction mattered more than anyone realized. The department faced a question of its own. Rex could be reassigned, retrained, placed back into service under a new handler. He was capable, proven, valuable, but every evaluation came back with the same note: exceptional loyalty, strong bond formation, highly responsive to familiar authority. Translation: he had already chosen his partner. When Ellie was asked if she would consider making it permanent, she didn't answer immediately. She looked at the dog lying at her feet, sleeping with a peace that had once seemed impossible. "I don't think he needs another uniform," she said finally. "I think he's done enough." The room nodded in agreement. Life shifted into something quieter. After that, morning walks replaced patrol briefings, routine checkups replaced emergency calls. The dog learned new habits, waiting by the door, resting in the sun, lifting his head at laughter instead of sirens. None or it erased who he had been. It simply allowed him to be more than that. One afternoon, they passed the street where everything had begun. The rain was gone, the footpath dry, people moved just as quickly as before. Rex slowed, glanced at the spot where he had waited so long, then kept walking. No hesitation, no pull, no need to stop. He had kept his promise. Now he was free to choose a future, and this time he walked forward without looking back. Months later, the city barely remembered the rainy morning when a silent dog brought everything to a halt. Traffic still rushed, people still hurried past one another, eyes fixed forward. But for those who had been there, something had changed. They carried the memory quietly, the image of a dog who stayed when no one else did, who waited long after the world moved on. It became a story shared not for drama, but for meaning. Rex lived differently now. His days were slower, steadier, filled with ordinary moments that once would have felt impossible. He slept deeply. He ate well. He played awkwardly at first, learning that joy didn't require permission. Yet, even in rest, his character never faded. He still sat straight, still watched doors, still listened closely when voices lowered. Loyalty wasn't something he turned off. It was simply no longer a burden. Occasionally, someone would recognize him. A passer-by would pause, eyes widening slightly. "That's the dog," they'd whisper. Ellie never corrected them, never embellished the story. She didn't need to. The truth was already enough. This dog had taught something no training manual ever could. That devotion doesn't disappear just because it's unseen. One afternoon, they attended a small community event near the same registrar's building where everything began. No rain this time, just sunlight and quiet conversation. As people gathered, Rex sat beside Ellie, calm and composed. A child approached slowly and asked if she could pet him. Ellie nodded. The dog leaned gently into the touch, tail wagging once. The crowd watched, smiling softly, understanding what they were witnessing wasn't just a friendly dog, it was a survivor. Someone placed a small plaque near the crosswalk days later. No names, no ranks, just a sentence engraved in simple letters: "Loyalty does not leave when forgotten." People stopped there sometimes, not long, just long enough to read, to remember, to slow down. Rex never returned to that spot again. He didn't need to. His duty had been fulfilled in a way no command could define. What he had waited for wasn't a handler's return, it was acknowledgement, and when it finally came, it freed him. Once ignored by everyone, he became something greater than a symbol. He became proof that loyalty, even when unseen, still matters.